Hi YouTube, Bettina here from Simply Fundamental. Today I want to talk to you about unexpected expenses because I just got back from Florida last Friday night, and as soon as I got home, I got hit with quite a few unexpected expenses. And so I want to go over the different types because sometimes these unexpected expenses, while they may not be planned, they are sometimes inevitable. Things break down. And so you do have categories where unexpected expenses will fall into the unplanned but inevitable category. And so how do I handle those type of expenses? When it comes to our co-op, we actually have buffer money put into the budget. So we collect more in fees and more in maintenance fees than cover the bills. So you always have to have somewhat of a buffer within your budget for the unplanned but inevitable costs that are related. Now, our AC in our unit would fall under personal, right? So that is again unplanned that it broke down, but while we were away, we got it fixed. And that hit around 3,200, which is actually a really good deal. And so it was repaired while we were away, and that was unplanned, but inevitable that it needed to be repaired. And so in my personal budget, I have money that goes aside that we have a little bit of buffer, no matter what, that goes for unplanned but inevitable expenses. And so the same thing goes for when I was on the flight and the water heater broke down and I was getting text messages that we weren't getting hot water in the building. And it turned out it ended up being an ignition on the A.O. Smith, I guess, hot water heater. I guess it's the gas portion that heats up the hot water. So that was replaced. And again, that would fall in the unplanned but inevitable expenses. So I want you to think about your expenses that way. You have to prepare for money within your budget to cover these uninevitable but unplanned expenses. And so the AC and the hot water heater breaking down on us falls in those categories. One going towards the co-op budget and the other going towards our own personal budget. And in both cases, those are quite big hits on the budget, and they can make any budget go awry. So how do I personally handle it? So I explained that we actually have some extra money going aside to cover these kind of things so that when it does happen, we're prepared. The other thing that you can do is sometimes you can just take it from your emergency fund. This is one of the things that an emergency fund could be there for. So sometimes you're just saving money aside, but you don't know what it's for. But in the event that your car breaks down or the heat goes in your home or you need to get a window replaced, the door breaks, you need to call the locksmith, that would fall under emergencies as well, right? So that's one area. But what do you do when you come home and you're opening your mail and you see that your mortgage company decided that they just went ahead and bought you flood insurance? So that's exactly what happened. We got home and we found out that our insurance company bought us flood insurance for a property we have in Florida. And the good news is that the condo itself has flood insurance and our unit itself is not on the first floor, so we don't really need additional flood insurance. We need hurricane insurance, but not flood insurance. And we have the hurricane insurance. So in that case, sometimes it takes work because you have to negotiate and fight and go through the process of making sure that you don't pay these kind of unexpected expenses that could really derail your budget. I didn't have an extra $1,000 built in that I was collecting every month for insurance on for flood insurance, right? So I know what my insurances are for the property. And it just meant going through the process of doing work to make sure I collected the paperwork from the condo itself, called the mortgage company, uploaded the documents, and then they're going to remove that extra approximately $1,000 that they charged us while we were on vacation to add flood insurance. And the mail was coming here, so I had no idea that we would charge this amount of money. And they take it out of our escrow balance. So the idea that you have to kind of go through the process, but sometimes that's what you need to do. Another area that this happened to me is back in January. Um, I had gotten a colonoscopy, so it was about every 5 or 6 years I go for a colonoscopy because the risk of colon cancer is high in my family, and so I did my colonoscopy earlier in January, and I called my insurance company. They actually helped me select a doctor. I went to that doctor, got my colonoscopy done, and came home again and was hit with a $3,400 bill, 3430 to 0.75, so $3,430, and claiming that the anesthesiologist was out of network. Now, that's a gut punch because that's not money that even emergency fund, typically when you have your emergency fund, yes, an emergency fund could cover that, but that really falls into an area where it was completely unexpected. And if you would have asked me a month earlier, it's not something that I would even anticipate. I've gotten a couple of colonoscopies in my life already. And so, again, this falls under having to call the insurance company and fight for my rights. Now, luckily, the insurance company was able to resolve it with my doctor's office, and that bill is going away. But it was completely out of network. And so, generally, what happens when you are out of network, you are on the hook for the cost. So, this happens to us often, and we don't even realize that these unexpected expenses sometimes could completely wipe out all the savings you did for a year. So it's kind of insane that you get hit with these kind of expenses, but they happen to eat the best of us. And so, again, what do you do in those scenarios where, let's say I did have to pay them, or let's say I did have to take the money and pay that unexpected but expense? It wasn't inevitable. It was something I possibly could have avoided had I known the anesthesiologist in the doctor's office was not covered. I would have said, nope, I'm going to go with I'm going to do my colonoscopy on a different day or with a different doctor. And I would have found one that had both in plan. Again, I've already had 2 colonoscopies before, and in both cases, both the doctor and the anesthesiologist were under plan. So the idea that I would go and seek out a bill that was, in general, actually, it was really a lot more than that, because it was $39.83.15, and my insurance company only paid $552.40. The rest of it was completely considered out of pocket. So therefore, I know I could have found a provider that also had an anesthesiologist that was in plan. But sometimes we're not thinking of doing these kind of things. And so now I'm on high alert that should I need any more care, it isn't just enough going to Cigna and say, hey, help me find a doctor that I can go to get a colonoscopy, because the doctor that I had used 6 years prior was no longer doing services. So what do you do? Number one, you can use your emergency fund, and then you can work on replenishing. Number two, you can sometimes I pay bills ahead. So for me, I have a buffer built into my emergency fund because I pay all my bills in advance. And so this includes even the mortgage on my rental property. I pay that in advance. The maintenance on all my properties, I pay that in advance. So at the end of the day, if I did need to come up with money, I could go a month without paying, actually quite a few months, without paying a bill. So I could come up with a way to pay these expenses. The other unexpected expense that hit, but I still think it's somewhat inevitable, is we got hit with a special assessment at our condo. And so our condo in Florida is, they're going to be doing, at our rental property, is going to be doing repairs on their exterior wall. And so I went ahead and got, I have to pay a special assessment for that. And so that means it's unexpected, but is it? I think when you buy a property, you kind of have to understand that sometimes they need to make improvements. And because I manage my Brooklyn property where I live here, I see that we actually have to do special assessments sometimes. So in my mind, I know that these are somewhat inevitable, because even though we're paying maintenance every month, the maintenance isn't enough to cover the really big repairs. And so, yes, every 10 years, we have a mortgage on the building and the property, and that mortgage comes to term every 10 years. And the co-op doesn't pay the mortgage off completely. They pay a portion of it, and then it gets rolled over into the new mortgage. And so the proceeds you get from redoing that 10-year loan gives you a big buffer so you can concentrate on doing a big capital improvement project. And so, for instance, if our building were to take out a loan for $750,000, by the end of the 10-year, we would probably pay off $150,000 of that $750,000 loan, and then we apply for a new loan for 750, and we would get the proceeds of approximately, after you pay the fees and stuff, a little over 110,000, somewhere between 110 and 120, that you would get to replenish your capital improvement budgets. And so that's generally what happens when co-ops and condos have loans on the land of the property, so that they can come up with the big capital improvements budgets. That said, is sometimes it's not enough to do all the projects that you need to do for the co-op. And that's where the special assessments come in. And so we were hit with a special assessment in our Florida condo because they need to do more than it's budgeted in our maintenance every month, and more than they collect potentially when they redo mortgages on the property and the land. And so in comes a special assessment. And the same thing here in Brooklyn. We redid our roof a couple of years ago when we redid the mortgage. I think the mortgage was redone back in 2020. So we're up for a new term for a mortgage in 2030 on where I live here in Brooklyn. And I think this was my second mortgage. No, it was my second or third that I've done with, I've been here quite a while now. So it's a second, so every 10-year term, with this bank to redo the mortgage for the property. And we went through that money pretty quickly because we redid the roof. And then we did the exterior walls on our building. And you probably heard a lot of construction noise in some of my prior videos. And some of it, I think, it was blamed on buses and passing by cars, but it was construction going on the exterior building. The exterior walls of our building. And so that was additional cost. And we, again, had to do a special assessment for that here in Brooklyn. And so special assessments might feel like they're unexpected because they come out of the blue, and all of a sudden you're being asked, depending on what the co-op, the condo is doing, to come up with money. In the case of our Florida condo, 5250 is what we have to come up with as of June 1st. So again, feels like a little bit of a sucker punch. So in the course of 1 month, we come home to find a 5250 assessment a $3,430 bill, which we were able to negotiate and have it go away. Approximately almost $1,000 in um, flood insurance that we were able to have go away. And again, the air conditioner for the building itself. Now, the repair when it comes to the hot water heater, that's smaller in size. That is actually absorbed within the co-op's budget, and we don't need to do a capital improvement or an assessment for that. But the exterior wall I was talking about, that we didn't raise enough. And so we'll have to cover the difference of what it ended up being after they were working on the building and it needed more repairs than we had initially anticipated. And so that means we'll have to do another special assessment to come up with that money. So over the course of this past month, the realization that I'd have to come up with another 3,600 for here in Brooklyn after just having paid 45, and then another 5250, these blow up a budget. Again, what do I do about it? Sometimes it does mean paying my bills in advance gives me that safety margin room so that I can pay those other expected but unexpected budgets. So I'm not feeling like I have to take cash out of the bank. I just pull my foot off the gas as far as paying some of the bills. And instead of me paying the mortgage for September, October, November, I'm going to take that money for the mortgage and put it aside to pay the special assessment for June. And as far as the special assessment for here in Brooklyn, that will be later in the year. And I'll deal with that when that comes. And I'll probably start putting money aside in my budget from month to month to that. So that's one way you can do it. You can negotiate your payments, which I did. You could start putting money aside in a sinking fund, which is what I'll do for the special assessment for Brooklyn. Or you can pause your non-essentials, which is what I exactly plan to do. Is I do not plan to pay the mortgage for our rental property since I've already paid so well in advance for a few months. And that will allow me to come up with the 5250 that we'll need for the special assessment in for the Florida property, for the Florida rental property. The good news there is we do have the rental, and the rental income is going to continue. And the young kids that are renting the apartments, if you followed along in the past, I thought they were going to be moving out. It turns out that they want to stay on the property, and so we'll go into a rental lease with them. So that's where we are. That's how I handle unexpected but somewhat unplanned but inevitable expenses, and somewhat unplanned but you have no idea they were coming. Sometimes you have to negotiate them down. In my case, I got particularly lucky when it came to the anesthesiologist that was out of network. But I'm not going to be so lucky when it comes to these special assessments. Those have to be paid for, and that's how I plan to cover it. Okay, Matt's making his way home, and I'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for tuning in.